Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Is copper the new silver? Let's explore! It is quite fascinating to see the rise of prices for many commodities out there. We all are very aware of it in many different sectors of the economy, but especially with those that are affected directly by these commodities, such as construction and the like. And really, that is one of the big reasons why we're seeing some of these great increases in prices, and that is because, well, there is great demand, coupled with a slowdown and shuttering of many of the manufacturing processes, including mining of some of the raw materials that make up, what we know in many different areas, such as wood and lumber prices, are skyrocketing, whereas maybe perhaps drywall prices aren't rising quite as fast. And, tied directly to construction and the like, well, we are seeing the same thing occur with copper. Copper is used in construction for various different projects, obviously housing, although less and less these days. But in terms of manufacturing other products and goods and services, there's a great demand for copper out there. And so we're seeing copper prices double, getting back to levels that we saw, some almost 15 years ago. In fact, what you're looking at here before you are examples of kind of the copper bullion boom that we saw at that time. For instance, we have a large bar here, a kilo copper bar, that is dated 2008 right there. Fascinating indeed to see. A lot of these bars are hard to come by these days, but nonetheless, they're kind of cool to have in the collection, and that's kind of one reason why I bought them, but they may have some collector value tied to them, who knows. But nonetheless, copper prices have doubled, but silver prices have not. Although we know the great demand we're seeing for silver, ideally, how is lumber priced, on the commodity markets exchanges? I don't know. But we know the prices are out of this world in the real world. And we know the prices for silver are kind of out of this world in the real world too, with the demand. But how much about demand for copper products? Well, as most of you are aware, I am not for buying copper bullion. And of course, I have a whole pile of it here to some degree, and other kinds of copper in various different forms to show you that I've accumulated over the years. But I didn't really buy it to protect any wealth or preserve my wealth, because the cost it takes to stack copper bullion in the form of rounds and bars and the like, well, it's just it's not worth the time or trouble, because when you stack this stuff, when you buy it, you're paying much more above the material costs and the spot price of copper, because copper is so abundant, it's priced in pounds as opposed to ounces. And so that's something one must take into consideration when buying these things. Now, many of us buy copper as companion pieces for silver products that are released, especially from some of these private mints. They may make a copper companion piece, but it should be understood fully that copper is the only metal out of all the metals out there, the entire spectrum of metals, that is still money. That's right, it is money, and is used not only as money, but also in transactions as currency. Almost every nation in the world utilizes some form of copper in their transactionatory tokens or coins. That's right, coinage used. In fact, what you see here is a tube of pre-1982 or 82 or earlier cents, pre-83 cents, that contain 95% copper. That's right. So this 1975 Lincoln cent is an example of such a piece that you can accumulate for 1 cent, and you've got about 3 cents worth of copper in it. Of course, it's illegal to really melt them down, but that's the best way to stack copper, is to accumulate it in a form of a Lincoln cent if you're in the United States, or to find coinage in your country that is still in existence that contains almost pure copper. 95% worth in that case. But nonetheless, another way to stack copper is to go out and find out what the weight of some of these fittings are that you can get at Home Depot and the like. And you may find yourself a pretty good bargain before these prices rise up. You have to be careful by the timing of this stuff. But you can find pieces like this out there and perhaps do very well with it if the prices don't rise before the commodity prices do. And this is a way. Now, these are pieces I actually found, although I did buy the other piece that has the barcode still on it. And but nonetheless, I think it's quite interesting and fascinating. Or if you are working construction and there's some stuff left over that's unusable and bendable, at least in that way, you can take home with you some copper wire. And I think those are low-cost alternatives to stacking or to accumulating copper as a wealth preservation tool. And but nonetheless, is it really a wealth preservation tool? That's the thing. I would say those copper cents are, for sure. But for the amount of space copper takes up, you're better off just stacking silver because, you can amass a lot of this stuff. In fact, I am kicking myself now because these copper cents, I had amassed quite a pile of them, and I went ahead and cashed them out because I thought, well, you know what? I doubt copper is going to get to where it was back in 2008 anytime soon, or 9, or what have you. And, well, most surely it is now close to those prices, if not higher. But there is a concern, according to a recent article from CNBC, and according to what the Bank of America tells us. Now, take that for kind of a grain of salt. Big bank, they talk about gold, silver. Now they're talking about copper, that the world risks running out of the metal amid widening supply and demand deficits. And essentially, pricing it per ton, we could see the price go up to $20,000 per metric ton by 2025. And so we'll see what happens, though. They say that, according to a strategist at Bank of America, that highlighted inventories measured in tons are now at levels seen 15 years ago, essentially saying that stocks currently cover just over 3 weeks of demand. This comes as the global economy is beginning to open and reflate. So linked to that, the forecast copper market deficits and further inventory declines this year and next. And with these inventories, especially like in the London Metal Exchange, close to the pinch point in which time spreads can move violently, the risk backwardation driven by rally in nearby prices may increase. Backwardation essentially is when the underlying asset is trading at a higher price than the futures market for that asset. Yes, we talked about that with precious metals, and we know especially that backwardation in a sense is happening in the physical markets, and for silver out there, especially with these high premiums they're selling and buying for. And so it is quite interesting, and we've have seen a rise in volatility resulting from falling inventories was not without precedent. This has happened before with nickel shortages in the LME warehouses in 2006 and 7. That drove nickel prices more than 300% higher. In fact, I've got a little bit of nickel bullion as well too that was from that process. They're starting to trade this stuff as actual bullion now. Copper bullion, nickel bullion, and other kinds of bullion that I've shown on my channel too. Even tungsten bullion, amazingly enough. But given the fundamental environment and the depleted inventories, Weidmer suggests that copper may spike to $13,000 a ton in the coming years after notching $10,000 last week for the first time in a decade. So copper prices stood just under $4.54 per pound, and it's up 30% for the session as of the recording of this video. So after deficits in 2021 and 2022, Bank of America expects the copper market to rebalance in 2023 and 24 before fresh shortfalls and further draw down on inventories kick in from 2025. So in their view, scrap supply is critical, and the analysis suggests that scrap usage at smelters, refiners could increase from around 4,200 per ton in 4,200 tons in 2016 to 6,700 tons by 2025. If our expectation of increased supply in secondary material, a non-transparent market, did not materialize, inventories could deplete within the next 3 years, giving rise to even more violent price swings that could take the red metal above $20,000 per ton. That translates to about $9.07 a pound. And so it is interesting to see. Essentially, copper being an abundant metal as well, kind of as oil is too. But people talk about peak oil and oil resources running out too. But they're likening it now to sort of the new oil. They're saying that with broader market or economic recovery, demand for copper is also being boosted by its vital role in a number of rapidly growing industrial sectors, such as electric vehicle batteries and semiconductor wiring. In fact, that one thing is for sure, this metal will be utilized in electric vehicles for sure, and a great amount of it will be. Much more so than silver, even though silver certainly will increase. And this is why some people are wondering, hey, could copper be the new silver? Now, obviously, this stuff is recyclable. It's not going to actually run out, and it can be reconstituted. I think that's the one thing people are forgetting about with copper, is its ability to reconstitute itself. But it'll certainly be something to pay attention to and keep your eye on. With this, what some people say is a crappy looking metal, and by this little nugget, it does kind of look like crap. But nonetheless, we'll see how it plays out. It is certainly an interesting time here, and it may not be a bad idea to hold on to some of your copper and stack it, at least in Lincoln cents. Commodity prices rose 3% in April all across the board, taking the global index up 80% since April of 2020. An HSBC commodity analysis highlighted in the note that demand for copper is being supported by investment in electrification as emission reduction strategies and further holstered by policymakers. Copper remains a commodity that's a favorite among some of these analysts out there. Copper's the new oil. I think copper for the next 5 or 10 years is going to look tremendous, with the potential for $20,000 per metric ton. It's a pretty bold call, and a lot of things have to happen, I believe, in order for it to get there. And I don't want this video to come across as me being overly bullish on copper, by the way, just so you understand. But I do have some stuff left over, and a lot of this stuff I've kind of forgotten about, but it is a very interesting metal indeed. And it's fascinating in how it tarnishes, and it's very kind of cool looking in its own way. But nonetheless, I think it's a metal to kind of watch out for. Again, I would not buy it as a hedge by any stretch of the imagination, but I would definitely consider it and stack it in ways that I've talked about, such as pre-82 Lincoln cents, finding good deals on fittings per se, and maybe you've got a way to smelt it down and melt it down into bars or what have you, or copper wire if you find it in scrap different places. And you can obviously do there's various different ways to be able to get it at a low cost, but the best way not to buy it is to go out and get rounds, especially rounds or bars, as you typically will pay a much higher premium than the amount of value that's in the metal. Even if it were to get to $9.07 per pound, you paying $1 or $1.50 for one of these rounds here, copper rounds, you are losing out. You're paying a very, very high premium with no return if you go to sell the piece. Very little chance of return if you go to sell the piece. So that's something to keep in mind too. But nonetheless, copper is an interesting metal, and I like it. But I like heavy metal anyways. I've always been a fan of heavy metal in this regard, or any regard, musically or physically, in the metallic form such as you see here. Copper. Could it be the new silver? I kind of doubt it. It's mostly an industrial metal, even though it is the only metal of all the metals out there that is considered an active monetary metal. It is awake, fully utilized in our transactions day to day as currency. But yet it is largely seen as a commodity. Very fascinating in that regard, I believe copper is. And there you have it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to hit that little notification bell. Share this video. I think it's very important to talk about copper in this day and age. Share it everywhere, all the platforms you can think of, and comment. And after all of that, when it's all said and done, subscribe.